Hi, welcome to SBR Sports Picks. I'm Peter Loshak. Today is Thursday, May 18th, and of course we have the second leg of the Triple Crown coming up, the 2017 Preakness Stakes. Always Dreaming, of course, won the Kentucky Derby a while ago, and he'll look to win the second leg of the Triple Crown, and we're going to discuss his chances of doing that along with all the other competitors with Joel Cunningham from TripleCrownInsiders.com. TripleCrownInsiders.com. Joel Cunningham, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, happy to be with you guys.
All right. So I think the first thing I want to ask you about is, of course, as we know, in the Kentucky Derby, there was a muddy track, right? Now, that is definitely not always the case, but in this year it was. I think it probably benefited Lookin At Lee. It was a slow pace, a muddy track, so there weren't any big closers in the Kentucky Derby this year like we usually see. How much do you think that affects the handicapping for the Preakness Stakes? Do you think there are any horses that ran in the Derby that were particularly hurt by the conditions of the track in the Derby and might be in line for a much improved race here in the Preakness?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the horses coming out of the Kentucky Derby that did not run well, I think of Gunnavera, I think of Hintz, two horses that seem to be, with Gunnavera, he's always been one of the top 3 to 5 colts in this crop. Now he's heavily raced, so some people question whether or not he's maybe not in his best form. He's over the top. But he's certainly on class, certainly fits with these, but he's a pace-reliant horse. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, it wasn't so much the pace of the Kentucky Derby in terms of the time. I think it had to do a lot with the way that racetrack was playing.
Right.
And closer essentially having to maneuver, through a field of 20, had little shot to run down the quality speed that was getting over the racetrack and carrying on like Always Dreaming was able to do. So, yeah, when you look at a horse like Hintz, who I think came in, as billed as highly for Steve Asmussen as Lookin At Lee was. Lookin At Lee was the trip horse in the Kentucky Derby.
Right,
that's what, as a handicapper, that's who we always look for. Now, unfortunately, in a field of 20 in the Kentucky Derby, you can never know who that trip horse is going to be from handicapping. It's essentially a crapshoot. And there's so many factors that go into it, including luck. For Lookin At Lee to have the rail open up like that, I think the inside of the track was where you wanted to be. It was sealed. It had not been run over for about 2 hours in terms of the last dirt race. They ran a turf race. Then they ran the Kentucky Derby, and they have long post time. So you basically had a 2-hour stretch there to where it was sealed. It stopped raining. That sun was baking the top of it. And that's why I think it catered to speed and really hurt the closers other than Lookin At Lee, because he was able to rally unimpeded up the inside. So to answer your question, I do think Hintz and Gunnavera, both in a more manageable type race like the Preakness, being that it's only 10 horses, I think definitely have a shot to run more true to their form.
Right. And one of my favorite way to bet the Triple Crown races is to bet matchup props. And I was looking at Lee and thinking that Lookin At Lee might be a good horse to bet to fade in matchup props because of all the things you said, and also because I just feel like his racing style is not that well suited to the Preakness. Right. He's more of a closer, and I feel like he's maybe overvalued a little bit because he did so well in the Derby. And would you agree that Lookin At Lee might be a good horse to fade either in matchup props or to particularly leave out of exotics in the Preakness?
No question about it. I start looking at this field and how I think this race is going to be run. I think the first thing you look at is the speed in the race. And there's 3 distinctive pace presence horses in here, and that's obviously Always Dreaming. Classic Empire, because of him getting wiped out in the Derby, right, he's going to be much more tactical in here. And then Conquest Mo Money, the 10 horse, has a lot of natural speed. And when he's engaged early in the races is when he runs his best. So I think you're going to see that. But really, everybody else, those other 7 horses really want to fall out of the gate, save ground, and make one run. They're one-run closer type horses. You may see a little tactical ability from Cloud Computing coming in fresh to maybe have a mid-pack type trip for Javier Castellano. But no, I agree 100% in here. When you start looking at this race and maybe some horses that are going to get, what we like to say, overlay odds in here. You would certainly look at a horse like Lookin At Lee because of his beneficial trip in the Kentucky Derby, finishing second there. He will take more money than his overall quality. And I do think there are at least, another handful of closers in here that are every bit as good as him that are going to be larger odds in here. But I do think this is a spread type affair. Lookin At Lee can hit the board. I don't think he's a horse that can win. He's a suck-up type horse that he'll do what he did in the Derby. If he gets the trip and there's enough pace to run at, I do think he can be on the board again, but to me, he's not a win candidate. But, when you start looking at the Preakness and the history of all these Triple Crown races, they are so important to owners that they get run much differently. I mean, look at Nyquist last year. He came in as the champion, the Derby winner. And what happened? He was gunned at the very beginning. You had long shots, awesome speed. You had the Colt from California along the inside that really pressed the pace. And what did it do? Pace makes the race. It set it up for a closer, an exaggerator. I think you're going to see I think there's a good chance you'll see a similar thing in here to where they'll be gunning after Always Dreaming early. And when I say there's only two horses that can do it, Classic Empire and Conquest Mo Money. And in terms of what happens between the 5/8 pole and the quarter pole, how much pressure is involved in the pace there, I think is going to dictate what happens that final eighth of a mile down the stretch. And really, all 6 or 7 of those closers have a license to hit the board in here. Maybe not all of them have a license to win, but all of them have a license to hit the board. I remember Cherry Wine was second over Nyquist in the Preakness last year. Right. I don't think he's won a race since then. So, and really, we've seen it quite often, even the year prior. You look at American Pharaoh, the horse that was second to him. I don't know if that horse has come back and won. I can't even think of his name right now, something unbridled. But just let you know that anybody can hit the board in here. But I do think there's a couple interesting closers that are better than Lookin At Lee in terms of closers that I think can trip out here. And if there's a meltdown, potentially get up for the win.
Right. And actually, it's interesting you mentioned Cloud Computing because that was one horse that I was looking at. He is kind of like a front-running horse anyway, and I could see him, stalking the pace and then having a much better than expected, or at least better than the market odds are giving him credit for finish. So which are some of those closers that you think might have a chance if what you just described does turn out to be the way the race goes?
Yeah, I think Cloud Computing, again, like you mentioned, the fact that he has a little more natural speed than a lot of these closers, it's going to put him in a position to get first run on some of the closers. Now, look, let's be honest. This is a pace-reliant race for any of those 7 horses thinking that they're going to run down Always Dreamin' and Classic Empire in the stretch. The only way they're going to have a chance to do that is if there's enough pressure early for those horses to cave in, and then you can come get them based on that type of setup. So Cloud Computing is going to need help. He can't save all the ground, run his best race, and still run by these classier horses in front of him. But I do think it's so interesting that, when you just listen to Mark Casse and you think of the fact that, he talks with Classic Empire, a champion that he didn't feel had a fair chance to go at Always Dreaming based on the break in the Kentucky Derby. Go back and watch that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Classic Empire has a ton of tactical speed. In a short field like this, particularly drawn right outside Always Dreaming, I think he is going to engage him. And I'll even go a step further. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see Classic Empire on the lead in here because I don't think John Velasquez is going to want to tangle with him early. So if Julian's aggressive out of the gate, I think Johnny's going to let him go, come around and commence a stalking type trip. Conquest Mo Money, what's he going to do from the outside? Typically when a speed horse draws the outside, they don't want to go straight to the lead because, usually the inside is more inclined to go to the lead because they don't want that pressure type trip being on the inside. But if you're outside, I could see Conquest Mo Money stalking the pace, Always Dreaming stalking. I could see Classic Empire on the lead in here. May surprise some people. I can actually see it. And then the race becomes interesting in terms of, when does Johnny go after Classic Empire? Or, say Johnny's in front with Always Dreaming. When's Classic Empire and Julian go after Always Dreaming, knowing that the Derby horse is the one they have to beat? That's where the race gets interesting to me from the 5/8 pole to the quarter pole. And then from that standpoint, it sets up for anybody. I mean, I love Mike Smith jumping on Gunnevere in here. He's the best big race rider in the country. To me, he's best on these one-run closers and timing that run. So if he's able to save all the ground from, really get a ground-saving trip like Gunnevere did in the Fountain of Youth and get the speed to back up in front of him like what happened in the Fountain of Youth, we know Gunnevere, once he unleashes that long stride and those long legs of his, he can really make up a lot of ground if he gets the setup. So to me, the two closers I'm looking at are Gunnevere on his back class and Cloud Computing with the benefit the fact that I think he's going to get a jump on the closer. And look, the Chad Brown angle is important here. Why is Cloud Computing in this race? Chad Brown is not one of these trainers that likes to throw horses to the wolves and take a shot in the Classic. There are a lot of them that are like that. Chad's not one of them. This horse has had 6 weeks up to this race. He obviously came out of the wood well to where I thought he would run better in there, but speed was holding that day. I think there's very good reason to believe that Cloud Computing is going to run a big race this weekend and at least be on the board.
That's what I was thinking as well. Right now, Cloud Computing is about 14-1 on some futures odds that I'm seeing. Gunnevera is also 14-1. Let's quickly talk about the two favorites, and let's talk about the trainers, because you brought up trainer tendencies. Now, as we know, Classic Empire, of course, got hit hard at the beginning of the Derby and was basically out of it. Still closed well and closed pretty impressively. And Always Dreaming right now, I'm seeing the odds I'm seeing, he's like even money, even 5-6. Classic Empire at 4-1. And as we know, Pletcher is not a big Preakness trainer, right? He's run a ton of horses in the Derby, rarely runs them back in the Preakness, although, of course, he has to run it, if a horse wins the Derby, he has to come back in the Preakness here. But Pletcher just doesn't have a good record in the Preakness or at Pimlico. And considering what a bad trip Classic Empire got, is Classic Empire getting maybe way disrespected at futures odds of 4-1 to win this race, and Always Dreaming at like 5-6?
From an odds standpoint, a betting standpoint, you could view it that way, but I view it on more of a horseman type level. Okay. When I'm comparing these two horses, I really believe Classic Empire is every bit as classy and as talented as Always Dreaming. But I also believe that Always Dreaming is a now horse, and he's coming into this race fresh in the right way. He hasn't had a bad day all winter and early spring. Todd Pletcher took the path of least resistance with him. Instead of running in tough races early in the year, they ran in easy races, really geared him up, and he broke through in the Florida Derby to earn his way into the Kentucky Derby, at which point we saw another lifetime best performance. And now he comes in as a fresh horse. You think of Classic Empire, he's had hiccups along the way all year long.
Yes,
he missed some training. They rushed him in the Arkansas Derby, and he ran very well in there. I actually thought he could benefit from that race coming back in the Kentucky Derby. But, it's only 3 weeks back to the Kentucky Derby, so you start thinking about his performance there, and just me personally, the way he was training there, he did not look like he was on top of his game. Now, he's so classy. He ran fourth, and I think he ran the second best race in the Kentucky Derby, aside from your winner, Always Dreaming. But now I'm trying to think, okay, Classic Empire, he's got this big reputation. Things haven't gone his way. He was rushed into the Derby. Now he's going to run in the Preakness, his third race in his third different state in a 5-week stretch, and try to run by a horse like Always Dreaming, your Derby winner, that comes in fresh and is the now horse. I don't see a scenario in my head to where he's able to do that unless he's able to get the lead and Johnny just happens to mistime his move on Always Dreaming. Because I will say this about Always Dreaming, and look, this is a credit to him. A horse that has his tactical ability and a smart rider, they're able to make their own race because that tactical speed allows them to dictate terms, as opposed to these other horses that aren't as good out of the gate as Always Dreaming is, or maybe are run closer, pace-dependent type horses. Everybody used to knock California Chrome for that. Well, he's not beating anybody. It's true, but he made his own races, and that's how good he was. Same thing with Always Dreaming. You have to give him credit for his tactical speed and his ability to make his own races. However, he's never had a straw in his path in his entire life. He's never had a difficult race scenario to overcome. So if Classic Empire engages with him early, I do think it can compromise Always Dreaming, but I personally don't think Classic Empire is the benefactor of it because I think they'll compromise each other. So to answer your question here from a win bet standpoint, I think there's two ways to play this race. I think you either take 4-5 on Always Dreaming and move on to the Belmont, where I think he's extremely vulnerable in the Belmont for a multitude of reasons, or I think you hope that Classic Empire takes it to Always Dreaming early, softens him up enough to where it sets up for a one-run type closer to suck up and get him late inside the 16th pole. And the two horses I think are best from a win standpoint at that point, if that plays out, are Gunnevera and Cloud Computing.
How do you feel about Hence? Because I felt like a lot of people were sort of picking Hence as a dark horse in the Derby, and that didn't pan out. How do you feel about Hence's chances here?
I think Hence has a big shot to outrun his odds. He came in and all three of Steve Asmussen's horses physically looked the best in terms of the eyeball test. When we go over there and watch these horses train in the 2 weeks leading up to the Derby, Steve Asmussen's horses all made the best impression as a collective group physically. Actually, bet Untrapped a little bit along with Looking At Lee in the Derby underneath Always Dreaming because I thought Untrapped had the best back class. Hence was the horse that always had the best reputation coming into the Derby in terms of that Sunland Derby victory. I do think that his race in the Kentucky Derby is a throwout. But I do think people will probably overvalue his Sunland Derby a little bit. Now, again, like I said, can any of these horses suck up and get a piece of the Preakness? Sure, can Hintz actually be the benefactor of a pace meltdown and win and out close a horse like Gunnevera, or even Cloud Computing that may have a little bit of a tactical edge and less work to do in front of him? I personally would lean towards Cloud Computing and Gunnevera from a win standpoint among all the closers in here, Hintz being one of them.
As we sit here Thursday, May 18th, what ways are you looking to bet on this one, and what would you recommend our viewers think about betting from a possible value perspective for the upcoming Preakness Stakes?
Yeah, so I think, the value is in the exotics, obviously more than the win pool or any of the whips pool. So I think in my view, I'm probably keying Always Dreaming, over a substantial amount of horses in the second, third spot. I think there's a scenario in here that, obviously it's most likely played out in my mind that Always Dreaming is going to win this race. I do think there's a scenario in here to where, it gets very chalky with Always Dreaming, Classic Empire second, and then maybe you get a bomb in third, but still the try is not going to pay anything with the chalks running 1-2. I do think there's a scenario in here that where Always Dreaming puts away Classic Empire, who could then flounder, and then you could get, a couple bombs like in the Derby running second or third. And I do think, you can spread pretty. Look, I'm not one to usually use the all button, but in this type of race, I do think, other than Conquest Mo Money, I think all those 7 closers I mentioned have a legitimate shot to run behind Always Dreaming on the board. Now, if you want to try to really make a lot of money and you think Classic Empire and Conquest Mo Money can juice this pace enough to maybe, make Always Dreaming fold, I do think you need to play that scenario. And like I said, the two I think are going to be the biggest benefactors are Cloud Computing, Gunnevera. Both are going to be attractive in the win pool. I think at that point, really, it brings all the closers into play because, look, if they're floundering down the stretch, those two win the race and anybody can run second and third. And then next thing you know, Always Dreaming runs third, Senior Investment could be second if he's floundering inside the 8th pole. And the Gunnevera trips out and wins because there's a pace meltdown. You could get extreme match boxcar type prices in here. But in that scenario, I would definitely go Cloud Computing and Gunnevera on top of quite a few of the closers in the second and third spots.
All right, that's what I was thinking as well. Sounds like we're kind of in agreement here. That's a good sign. Joel Cunningham from TripleCrownInsiders.com. Thanks so much. Very thorough analysis. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the Preakness.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our channel. Now, we've put a lot of work into producing all these free videos, so please help us out and keep all our content free for you forever by simply liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Now, not to mention, a visit to our industry-leading website will warm the hearts of all our SBR employees, especially myself. Now, the links are over there to the left, so do check those out. Thanks for watching.